Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about specialty ranged units. So there aren't many of them in the game, but they are really valuable. It's going to be your Falconetti Gunners, your Sifanari, which I just call the Flame Boys or Flamethrowers, and then the Zykelian Militia. Everything else is pretty much an archer or a musket or a crossbow unit. There aren't any units other than that have this sort of weird weapon that we don't see in CB a lot. Let's go ahead and get right in. And I haven't mentioned this before. I've just done it without thinking. So whenever you get a new unit, I'd always recommend just testing out first in an AI training battle. Or you can go to your billeting officer and go ahead and do unit training, which is what I use to showcase all the units here. And that really helps you get a good feel for the unit and how it operates. So I'd always recommend doing that before you get into a battle with them, because it'll really help you know how to use it instead of just immediately getting destroyed. So let's go ahead, we're going to talk about the mechanics a little bit, and then we'll go into the veterancy tree for them. So let's go ahead and start with the flamethrowers. Now these are both golden era units. You have to grind them out in the seasonal challenge, and because they're golden era, it's going to take you a while. So for all these ranged specialty units, the unit count isn't actually very high, but they can be pretty powerful. So with the flamethrowers, they are really squishy, but they are fast and mobile. You really have to play them close to the enemy units. They're great if you can protect them in a push. You definitely want the melee up front. Fortunately, we can't do that here. So the way this flame damage works is it's actually classified as blunt damage. It's classified as blunt damage and can pierce through several units. What I would recommend is if there aren't a big amount of troops around that you're not piercing through or trying to mow down, and you're just waiting around a corner, I would go ahead and switch them to melee because their ammo supply is very low. So it is something you have to keep an eye on. So like if one surf runs around, they'll all shoot at it and it will take up a decent amount of your ammo. So if you're not using them or in a big push, I would just swap to melee mode and it'll really help you stay in the battle a little bit longer. And like I said, they're pretty fast though. So if you get a chance, you can rotate them to a supply point to get more. The melee damage isn't too bad on these units, but again, they are very squishy, don't have a whole lot of health, so you don't really want to use them in melee combat. The combo I would recommend doing when there's a giant clump is light the ground on fire first. That'll pretty much burn everything you see as they walk on it, and then use your firestorm, which is a constant spray of fire that'll just mow everything down. And then of course they'll auto target. These flames will actually stun units and heroes as well, so it is very hard for heroes to go in and sneak up. If they get tagged by one of them, they'll be stunned. They're lit on fire for a few seconds, so they're very easy to kill. Just keep an eye on them. These are a unit that you have to protect and play around, but as you can see, their damage is insane. Armor doesn't really help defend against this flame damage, as you see here. Even though these are low tier troops, you'll still get the same results when killing something like Iron Reapers or Stalwarts. And another important thing to keep in mind is you can actually arc. Oh, those are archers. So ranged is going to be your biggest weakness as well. So just keep an eye out for it. I'll just kill these guys myself. Range is going to be your biggest weakness, and you definitely want to use them in a push or around a corner, and I can showcase that in a second once we get another melee troop in. There we go. Alright, let's see what we get. More archers. That is really unfortunate. Well, let's see how we do against them. Since they're just levy bowmen, I don't think it'll be too much of an issue. Oh! As you can see, they are really squishy. I mean, the entire unit is wiped by just levy bowmen. So, gotta watch out for that ranged. Any high tier ranged unit will just completely annihilate them. Well, we'll wrap around back to that and I'll show you placement. Let's go ahead and talk about the Falconetti Gunners. Alright, so the Falconettis are a long-range suppression unit. There are two ways you can play this unit. The top veterancy line will give them more accuracy, or the bottom will give them more ammo, movement speed, and an extra 2 guys. So the bottom line you use as shotgun falcos, which means you're right up there in the push, you're right behind your melee units, and you're just unloading ammo. However, I went top line with mine for the sniper effect. I would always recommend manually firing. There's very few cases like this. If they're coming in, I would just hit V, but it's hard to showcase on this map. I would recommend macro firing them or manually targeting it with their one ability. And again, they can't shoot if a unit is right on top of them. They have no melee combat and they are pretty slow. So I'd recommend putting a sprint doctrine on if you get a chance. And like the flamethrowers, these guys are pretty weak. I don't know why they're not dead. I think it's because these weird square units just don't do a whole lot for some reason. But you get 10 of them. It's also blunt damage, so you don't really need a lot of pen. It'll do some damage. What I would recommend doing a really good playstyle for it is if you can leave them back in a place where they're relatively safe, go ahead and move up with your hero and try not to die, because this allows you to get better shots, right? If you're up here on the fight, they're parked back on the wall up there, for instance, and you can micro them all the way from up there in the fight. It's pretty good. Also keep in mind that the blue arrow means you can fire, and if there's a building in the way or some sort of wall, that arrow would turn red right there. So, or that line, I guess, my bad. That line will turn red, which means that none of your shots will hit, or it'll be very hard. These can actually be microed like a normal archer unit, where you can shoot outside of the range a little bit, and unlike the archers, they don't seem to take a damage reduction penalty for doing that. Yeah, go ahead and show. Oh, actually, I need ammo. The ammo supply is again really low on these guys, so I would just keep it in mind. You can do suppression fire with it. They're really good for taking down artillery, siege towers, and giant clumps or pushes. I don't really notice a difference between the F1 and F2 formation. There is a little bit, so hold on. Just trying to get rid of these troops real quick. The difference between F1 and F2 is I would use F1 as sort of a giant area of effect, right? So if you want to cover all that area right there and there's a lot of units and it's just a giant death ball, I would go ahead and put them in the F1 formation. If you're trying to be more accurate, like I do with all my other ranged units, I would go ahead and put them in the F2 formation in a line pointing at what you want to shoot, and they seem to get a little bit of accuracy with that. So as you can see, the shots are pretty close together, about as close as you can get for a unit like this. And they'll pretty much kill anything they hit. Let's go ahead and move them out here. So to showcase the difference in accuracy, oh, here we go. So because they're in that loose formation, they're shooting and covering a lot of area compared to the line formation where they will be a little bit more accurate. Trying to get them out of this so the AI stops spawning. I don't know why it's not working with me here. There we go. Alright, so again, you'll get that blue circle, but if they can't shoot, it'll turn red for you, right? So you can see that clearly here. The difference in accuracy, we're going to showcase here. So that's very spread out. You're going to cover a lot of area with it versus the line 2 formation we'll see here. So it's a little bit more accurate, not by much, but it's about the best you can do with this unit. Alright, let's go ahead and wrap around back to the flamethrowers. Apologize, that was sort of long-winded. I don't know why the units kept spawning in the AI training battle. It's only supposed to spawn if you move them back to that little circle that pops up after you wipe the unit, and it just kept coming for some unknown reason. So let's go ahead and talk about the flamethrowers a little bit more, and then we'll finish up with the Zykellian militia. So for the flamethrowers, I recommend hiding them in a kill box. So say right around this corner, right? You have your shields right here, you have your Forte Braccio protecting, and then your flamethrowers would be in protected. I'd always recommend hiding them around a gate if you're trying to play defensively. And arcing, so we'll talk about that here once the unit gets close enough. So you can actually get around that effective range by arcing it a little bit. Just gonna wait till they get a little bit closer. There we go. So as we can see, it's definitely a little bit further than the range should be, so they were hitting right about here. Here, I'm gonna go ahead and set the ground on fire. So I was right about here. So you can arc it by aiming up, and you'll actually get about double the range. Just look up, arc it a little bit. Oh, well, not that high. But as you can see, it drops a little bit, so that's really your effective range. It is kind of hard to do, so I'd recommend practicing with it in unit training first. Want to try and arc it up a little bit. There we go, that's going to be a decent shot. So as we can see, the flames are traveling a lot further right about here, even though the effective range shows only up to here. That's another important thing to keep in mind. Let's move on to the Zykellian militia. So like these other specialty units, they don't really get a whole lot of units. You only get 12. They're extremely weak. There is no melee attack, so you definitely don't want to let them get close to any melee unit. The best position for this unit is up on the walls. The 2 is kind of weird. So the 2 is the area attack, and even when you can throw it, it'll still show a red circle. It kind of threw me off when I was playing with the unit at first, and it was really weird to see. You have enough for 5 or 6 volleys if you go the right line. You want to go for the range and the initial blunt damage. As you can see, they'll kill these units, kind of. But, I mean, a volley can't even kill these domain spearmen. They just aren't effective. I'd recommend putting them on castle wall. That's in the best position. But normally I'll only get 1 or 2 volleys off before they get hit by a random arrow, or a hero will come up and wipe them. They're kind of fun to play with. I wouldn't really recommend using them if you're trying to grind bonds or be effective in battles, and you definitely don't want to use them in territory wars. The one is the free throw, which I wouldn't recommend ever using because they'll all go in different directions, and you really want the concentrated blunt damage off the volley to hit multiple units rather than just 1Z, 2Z. I think that's about it. So let's go ahead and talk about the veteran sea lines. So there aren't specialized doctrines for this unit like there are for polearm units or sword and board or archers. So you're pretty much stuck with using base, damage, health, and pen doctrines for these. I'd recommend getting the seasonal doctrines for them on all these units because they're pretty good, and then piercing defense and whatever damage you can. Actually, let me see if I have a blunt damage one. No, so for this one, it's kind of weird. It won't even let me put blunt damage on it because I think it's classified as some sort of weird damage, even though technically it's blunt. So I do piercing damage, breakthrough, health, and then the two seasonal ones. And for the veterancy, I definitely recommend going top line over the bottom line. The bottom line buffs the lighting the ground on fire, but it's just not as effective as the increase the damage from the firestorm, which is where they constantly use their flamethrowers. The Falconettis, I would put defense and health as well, and utility doctrines, so to speak. Because if any melee units get close to them, they're dead. Same with a hero. But if you put a lot of piercing defense, they can actually survive a few arrows. Sprint is really important for the Falconettis. You don't really need blunt damage or blunt armor pen because it has so much. I mean, you got 5,000 blunt armor pen and 3,500 damage. That's enough to kill anything, so I wouldn't worry about it. And again, I went top, so it's the more accurate sniper line. You can go bottom and use them as a really close range suppressive fire, or shotgun falcos, as people often call them. Both are very valuable or viable, and both will be used in T-Wars. It just depends on your playstyle. The Zykellian Militia, I'd put blunt damage and blunt armor pen, health, and piercing defense, and then the seasonal doctrine for more ammo, and go bottom line for the ammunition and the range. But again, I wouldn't ever really use this unit. It just isn't effective enough, and I hope it gets a buff or some sort of rework because it would be cool to see it viable, and even if it's just in siege matches. But right now where it's at, it's just not effective at all in Season 8. And it hasn't been since it came out in Season, what was it, 4 or 5? I'm not sure, I can't keep any of them straight anymore. Well, I hope this helped explain the mechanics of these units and how they work a little bit. These two are definitely really good to go for. They're specialty units, and they're going to be very valuable in territory wars. So your house officers and mates will often say definitely go for them, and I'd agree, because they do serious amounts of work in those battles.